studying and knowing sometimes means delving back into history. And this morning I want to invite us to begin by looking back to April 19th, 1775. Way back. On that famous day, a group of citizens, a group of colonists who were on the verge of becoming American citizens, had been summoned by Paul Revere and other gathered co-writers, William Dawson and Samuel Prescott, to gather at Northridge at Concord, determined to stop the advance of British troops. Somebody fired a shot. Nobody knows now for sure, but people have described that as the shot heard round the world, the beginning of the American Revolution. Across the green at Concord, the young minister and his family were gathered as a witness to this historic event. The minister's wife, Phoebe, held her youngest child, Mary Moody Emerson, in her arms. Later, when Mary Emerson, we'll drop the Moody for the moment, when Mary Emerson met the General Lafayette, she said, "I was in arms at Concord." Mary Moody Emerson was a true daughter of the American Revolution, and she would, in her own way, abet and aid a revolution in ideas that helped change American cultural attitudes and religious beliefs. The war that started that day would alter history and the personal journey of Mary Emerson. Her father, William, in the weeks that followed, offered more support for the new revolution. He served as an army chaplain, and he became ill with what was described as army fever. Not quite sure what that diagnostic meaning would be now, and he died. Mary wrote 50 years later that he loved the family well, and it was as good to it as an angel. He loved our beloved revolution better, and he would minister to it even though it would cost his life. His widow was unable to care for the family, and Mary was sent, as was the practice of the time, to live with other relatives. She lived with her maternal grandmother and an aunt, and that was kind of the typical situation. Now, when her mother remarried and the family's fortune improved, she remained with her grandmother and her Aunt Ruth. Now, this sharing of children, both as a responsibility and as a gift, was another not uncommon practice when extended family had strong connection. Now, we don't do that as much now. On occasion, it does happen. But what happened in this particular situation, the separation from the nuclear family meant she grew up in a women's-headed household. Her grandmother, and her aunt. Mary's separation from her siblings and the isolation accompanied that shaped her. She lived as an only child. Her tendency to be a loner became a necessity. In time, she found comfort in books. She read and thought with a depth not common for young women of her time, because in a woman's household, she had the opportunity to do so. She was less subject to cultural limitations on behavior than many of her female peers. Let us not forget the reality this time. The Declaration of Independence and Ralph Waldo's language specifically referred to men. And in those times, that's exactly what they meant. It was not an inclusive pronoun. It was intended to be men. Because the role of women was very different and subscribed and prescribed. Mary Moody, though, through her scholarship and deep thought, was able to speak and write in a manner that helped the thoughts of the feminists of the generations that followed hers and the view of her famous nephew, Ralph Waldo Emerson. As part of my seminary studies, I came across the book titled Mary Moody Emerson and the Origins of Transcendentalism, A Family History by Philip Cole. It's a fascinating account of that family in those times. Ralph Waldo Emerson, whom the Unitarian Universalists claim with pride as our own, and is often acknowledged as the significant shaper of our faith, came from a long line of ministers. His Aunt Mary was the keeper and transmitter of knowledge of that family history, for grandfathers on both sides of the family had been clergy. Ralph Waldo, though we claim him as a former Unitarian minister, only stayed in the pulpit for about 2.5 years. He left in a time of some controversy because church leaders wanted him to perform communion, a ritual to Ralph Waldo that was dated and of little significance in those times. Another rousing speech that you ministers really love is when he went to the congregation and said, if that's what you want from your minister, you may have to go find another one. Fortunately for Ralph Waldo, he did better financially on the lecture circuit and as a writer than what the pay of a minister would have provided. His search was not for a stable job, but he sought for ultimate meaning. And it took place outside the church. He found a deeper sense of awe in nature than he did in any traditional ritual. We get a sense of that from his divinity school address language about a refulgent summer day. Other parts of that famous address, he critiqued a minister who stuck to his biblical text and ignored a storm raging outside. Ralph Waldo suggested a different kind of religion, a different kind of seeking. Now, he was successful on the lecture circuit and as a writer, but a much more limited range of possibilities existed for a woman. A woman could best secure a stable home and income through marriage. Mary's journals indicate that she declined at least 2 proposals of marriage, as she wrote in 1832. I never expected connections in matrimony. My taste was formed about matrimony, and I knew I was not destined to please. I love God and his creation as I never else could. Mary had the unique good fortune to inherit from her grandmother a small farm. She later sold it and bought a share in a home in what was then the wilderness of Maine. As she had no family of her own, she was periodically called in to serve and assist family members who were ill. She accessed family libraries in that way, and in time built a small library of her own. Misfortune became an opportunity. She would, in contemporary language, be described as a bit eccentric and seemed difficult to live with. She had little patience with the niceties and restrictive manners that women of those times were expected to follow. She wore drab clothing and later in life a kind of cap that was mostly only considered funeral garb. What that was all about, one can only guess. Mary was one of those people who, as Ralph Waldo might have put it, marched to a different drummer. She would, now adjusting for gendered language, her lifestyle was very much in what Ralph Waldo wrote of in his famed essay, Self-Reliance. He wrote, "Whoso would be a man, or I would add a woman, must be a nonconformist. She who would gather immortal palms must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of our own mind. Absolve you to yourself, and you shall have the suffrage of the world. In describing an exchange with his nonconformist Aunt Mary, Ralph Waldo also wrote, I remember an answer which when quite young I was prompted to make to a valued advisor who was wont to importune me with the clear old doctrines of the church. Am I saying, what have I have to do with the sacredness of tradition if I live wholly from within? My friend, who we know was Mary, answered. But these impulses may be from below, not from above. I replied, they do not seem to me to be such, but if I am to be the devil's child, then I will live with the devil. No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature. Good and bad and are but names very readily transferable to that or this. The only right is what is after my constitution. The only wrong, what is against it. To believe your own thoughts, to believe what is true for you in your private heart is true for all. That is genius. Thus Ralph Waldo wrote. He continued, a man or woman should learn to detect and watch the gleam of light that flashes across one's mind from within. One ponders where such notions came from, and some of them seem to have come from Aunt Mary. For she continued, Ralph Waldo continued to hold the doctrines of the church, but she also encouraged him to seek answers in his own mind and not to merely follow convention and tradition. Mary's own quest for independence of thought began before Waldo's birth. Early on, and she developed that taste for books that I mentioned. She read extensively, beginning with novels. Her early readings included the Bible. She expanded to the English poets, Milton, Young, and a few others, and religious writers, Samuel Clarke and Jonathan Edwards. As a young woman, she would read Plato, Plotinus, Marcus Aurelius, Shakespeare, Coleridge, Wordsworth, Cousins, Locke, and Channing, Byron, Spinoza, Rousseau, and Goethe. She didn't go to Harvard, but she was pretty well read. Because Harvard was not available to a woman in those times. Her education through books, lectures, correspondence, and sermons and conversations was completely self-directed. As she wrote, an insatiate roaming after metaphysics and Illuminati. She denied that Harvard education that the boys would have had access with. She made the seeing of personal truth and knowledge a central concern in her life. Ralph Waldo later stated that she was like he was part of the sect of seekers. To me, that's a good description of contemporary Unitarianism. What we seek to be is a sect of seekers, like our forebears, forefathers and foremothers. He wrote, but in the dead of night, mere morning, when the eastern star glows with a luster that penetrates the spirit and wonder of curiosity, then however odd, who can fear? She was a deeply religious woman who wrote of the wisdom of Christianity as feminine. She wrote, her form, full of majesty, strongly impressed with joy and hope, her eyes raised to heaven with tears for Zion and rays of glory, descending the earth at her entreaties. Mary's writings were only on rare occasions published until more recently, and she is like other women of her time, can only express her thoughts and emotions through the privacy of prayer and her own personal journal writings, what she called her almanac. Yet this fearless, independent, thoughtful, and thought-filled woman helped to shape the Emerson that we more modern readers have come to know. In a public address about her, Waldo reported of their early conversations. It was a privilege of certain boys to have the immeasurable high standard indicated to their childhood, a blessing which nothing else in education could supply. Part of that tribute to her is on her tombstone. Mary developed a great facility with language, and her descriptions of the natural world rivaled those of her acclaimed and oft-published nephew. In an 1822 entry in those journals, she wrote, "These lamps are held to measure out some of the moments of eternity, to divide the history of God's operation in the birth and death of nations, of worlds. It is a goodly name for our notions of breathing, suffering, enjoying, and acting. We personify it. We call it by every name of fleeting, dreaming, vaporing imagery." I love that line. Fleeting, or vaporing, and dreaming imagery. Yet it is nothing. We exist in eternity. Dissolve the body, and the night is gone, the stars are extinguished, and we measure duration by the number of thoughts, by the activity of reason, the discovery of truths, the acquirement of virtue, the approach to God. Such transcendent spirituality seems to foreshadow Ralph Waldo's writings on transcendental thought. In his 1842 lecture, The Transcendentalist, he wrote, "The Transcendentalist adopts the whole connection of spiritual doctrine. He believes, I would add she, in miracle, in the perpetual openness of the human mind to due influx of light and power. He believes in inspiration and ecstasy. He wishes that the spiritual principle could be suffered to demonstrate itself to the end in all passable applications to the state of humanity, without the admission of anything unspiritual, that is, anything positive, dogmatic, or personal. Thus, the spiritual measure of inspiration is in the depths of thought, and never who said it. And so he resists an attempt to palm other rules and measure of the spirit." Mary gave to Waldo, and through him to us, the gifts of her intellect, gifts derived through deep thought and often difficult times of solitude and material poverty. It's important to note that she kept her almanac, her personal journeys, for an extended time. And Ralph Waldo had them, and he transcribed them in their entirety. It seems that therein he found the seeds of what would later blossom as transcendentalism. Now, while I won't go as far as my UU history David Bumbaugh suggests, and when he used the word plagiarism, I have no doubt that Ralph Waldo, and now us, had a great debt to that which she gifted to her. Now, while few of us have the verbal eloquence of either of the Emersons, we all have the capacity to bring to our interactions with others our true self, to listen to one another's deepest ponderings and to respond not with answers to their questions, but rather with prompts and suggestions that help each individual to determine what they hold to be true. Now, I remember when I was coming to adulthood, the incredible value I received from the first Unitarian Universalist minister I knew, Adolf Leibniz. He would spend hours in open conversation with all of us in the youth group in the Salem, Oregon church. He listened and responded lovingly as we sought to understand that which is spiritual for each of us. Not his teaching, but to find that truth for ourselves. That's the core message of transcendentalism. Now, you may have had the good fortune to have a family member or a teacher or professor or other mentor whom you could explore your deepest and most profound life questions. In communities like this, we continue to have those opportunities. You may have also been a mentor to give some of that gift of deep listening and heartfelt counsel, to serve as a sounding board as one painstakingly constructs, each of us, our own answers to life's deepest questions, to find our truth. Lessons about nature and from nature rarely fail to fill my heart with joy. That's where I go for my deepest contemplation. As Ralph Waldo Emerson described in his famous essay, Nature, the happiest man, I would add, or woman, is the one who learned from nature the lesson of worship. The lesson of worship. Or as Mary Moody Emerson, the woman from whom Ralph Waldo learned so much, put it, we love nature. To individuate ourselves in her wildest moods is to partake of her extensions and glow with her colors and fly on her wings. Let all of us fly on nature's wings, as did Ralph Waldo and Mary Moody Emerson. May it be so.